Welcome back to allthingsfulfilled.com. I'm William Bell, and this is part 2 of our study on this generation. Let's look at how Jesus used the term generation. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered, saying, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." But he answered and said to them, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." Matthew 12 and verse 39. These were scribes and the Pharisees who had come to Jesus. They were demanding of him to see a sign. They said, "We want to see a sign from you." And then he answered them and said, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign." That was the same generation that demanded it of him, that asked him, that was standing in his presence in the first century. And thus he says, no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Now we have to understand that the same generation that saw Jesus' death and burial is going to be the same generation that he speaks of concerning the time of the end. These were Jews who lived contemporary with Christ in the first century. Here's the second time this same issue comes up with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came testing him and asked him that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, "When it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red, and in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times." So the Pharisees and the scribes, once again, who were in the first century demanding of Jesus a sign, he responded to that same group of people, telling them that they knew how to look up in the sky and determine the weather, but they could not discern the signs of the times. Now, why was he telling them in the first century that they could not discern the signs of the times if the signs of the times were not going to even start to happen until the 21st century? It doesn't make any sense. He was talking about contemporaries in his own generation. And so he said, "A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." And he left them and departed. Now, let's look at the generation of murderers. This is how he characterized them at the close of his ministry. In Matthew 23, he says to them, "You are the sons of those who kill the prophets." He said, "Therefore, fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. I send to you wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth." Matthew 23, verses 31 through 35. Now, when he spoke to them about being the murderers of the wise men and scribes he was going to send to them, he said, "Assuredly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation." And he identifies that generation as first century Jerusalem. He says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem," according to Matthew 23 and verse 36, all of these things were going to come upon your generation. Now, following that discussion, they leave the temple, and his disciples come to him privately and ask this question: "When will these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Because he had just told them that destruction and desolation was going to come on their temple, and their house was going to be left to them desolate. And here's his response: "Assuredly, I say to you, this generation," speaking again of that same group of people, that same contemporary group, "will by no means pass away till all these things take place." In other words, that generation, the very same one that asked of him a sign, would not pass until all the events of Matthew 24 took place. So where is that generation today? Are they walking around on earth? Are they sitting up in dispensational churches? No, we know that they've all passed away. But they could not pass away until all these things were fulfilled. Now, it's impossible for God to lie. Titus 1 and verse 2 and Hebrews 6 and verse 18 tells us it's impossible for him to lie. So either Jesus is a liar or men are. You decide. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for video number 3.